here today on this Friday afternoon. I'm Kathy Zimmerman. I'm the Associate Vice President for Strategic and Emergent Academic Initiatives, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of University Academic Affairs, the Council on Online Education, and our partner in today's session, the Rutgers Microcredentials Steering Committee. My colleague, Chris Drew, who is the Associate Director of Teaching Evaluation in the Office of Teaching Evaluation and Assessment Research, more commonly known as Otter, will introduce himself a little bit later in the session. And Chris is a member of the Microcredentials Steering Committee, and he will lead the facilitated discussion portion of our program. We're excited to welcome our outside experts. Kevin Clarke is the Associate Director for Research Advisory Services at EAB. And of course is here to share insights on the microcredential space. Anthony Mitchell, Senior Director in EAB's Partner Success Organization, and my go-to for all things EAB also joins us together. I'm going to let Kevin and Anthony also introduce themselves as we move forward. Before we start, I wanted to give you a couple of housekeeping items. First, we're recording this session. We plan to post this and as well as previous expert forum sessions to the UAA website. Look for those to appear early in the summer. And for our time together today, Kevin is going to kick off with a formal presentation and share insights from EAB. We'll then turn to a facilitated discussion, which Chris will lead, and we'll have that until about 2 p.m. And then
1:30.
Thank you. And we'll start at 1:30. And then for those of you who are able to stay, we will turn to a less formal discussion and open the floor for your particular comments. So with that, I am going to unpin myself and find Kevin and give him the floor.
All right. Hi, everyone. Super great to see you all here today. I'm Kevin Clarke, and my picture, let me share my screen here so you can see my face in multiple places. But there we go. Are we good here? Everybody seeing that? Okay, awesome. So I'm Kevin Clarke. I am a member of our Research Advisory Services team here at EAB. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit today about microcredentials and achieving smart growth in the space. I've been with the company for a little over 2 years at this point. I started on our student success team, transitioned over to our Research Advisory Services team last year. And prior to that, I worked in higher education administration for about 15 years, focusing on student recruitment and retention in higher ed. Super excited to go deep with you all today on our microcredentials content. But first, I did want to let my colleague Anthony introduce himself to you all as your research strategic leader. Anthony, you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here once again in partnership with Rutgers. Anthony Mitchell, Senior Director on our Research Partner Success team. And as Kathy mentioned, I'm kind of the connection, the glue, right, between our partnership, making sure that I'm plugged in to the key items and strategies that are happening on your campus and across the institution as it relates to professional and adult online education. And I bring in experts like Kevin and content to help drive discussions and ultimately, hopefully, decisions and processes that come next out of these type of interactions. So happy to be here, and thanks again, Kevin and Kathy.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being a part of this. So let's just get started here looking at the title of our presentation today, which is Achieving Smart Growth in Microcredential Programs. Some folks look at this and they asked us the question, does that mean there's dumb ways to grow these programs? And certainly while that would never be the EAB line or our expectation, we have recognized that there are more strategic and more intentional ways to think about microcredentials, how to enter into the space, how to continue to build on the space in a way that's going to help you kind of achieve the goals that you have set out. And so what we'll dig into today is a little bit of some of those best practice tactics, a little bit of the lay of the land where we're at. And I know Rutgers is particularly well developed in thinking about microcredentials. So some of this may be a little elementary to some of you. Some of it might be a little bit new, but hopefully at least fosters some great discussion for us in the second half of our time together to talk about how this really relates to what you all are doing at Rutgers. So I'll skip through myself, but we'll share these slides and follow up. So you'll have my name and email there in case you have any questions after our conversation. And Anthony and I think addressed a little bit about EAB here, but for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're your partner in helping you advance your strategy in all aspects of institutional success. And then we also support partners in a variety of different ways, as you see there, one of which is that student success space, which is where I mentioned I got my start. So let's talk a little bit about microcredentials. So as they are, probably happening on your campus, happening everywhere. A lot of conversation around this idea, right? Is that how we can do this quicker learning? This is maybe the future of higher education. This is what students and employers are looking for. Governments are talking about it, international organizations. And on the data on the right there, you see some data that kind of backs that up. About 2/3 of American adults thinking getting a microcredential could be worth the cost, the time. 81% of executives are saying that employees who hold microcredentials are gaining credibility or will gain credibility at their organization. And the growth is also happening. We've had 200% growth in the number of alternative credentials offered in the market between 2018 and 2020. So that was just that 2-year period where we had this most recent data. So certainly a lot of interest, a lot of pressure then that might build from that, in terms of expectations from leadership to get into the space, to meet students' demands, to make sure that we're offering and responding to this employer expectation. And so that kind of gets us a little bit of a framework of what we're kind of thinking about, why this is relevant and on folks' minds. But I also want to make sure that we have a little bit of a shared definition going into our conversation today. I know Rutgers has a great definition that's available on your website, but what we'll be using is the definition that you see here on the screen that has these 3 characteristics. So the first is that it's got to be a credential of some kind. And I know that might seem relatively simplistic, but that can often be overlooked in this space. Higher education offers credentials, and so a microcredential is something that higher education would offer. It needs to be codified in some capacity, and it might be a badge or a certificate or something else, but there has to be some sort of credential that's attached to the completion of learning. So that's a key element and component of this. The second is that it doesn't need to be micro. It needs to be smaller in scale than what you traditionally offer. So that can be, of course, relative to the institution. As an institution that offers more traditional degrees, let's say you didn't offer certificates, a certificate might be your microcredential. But as it looks at Rutgers, you all are offering more badges and those smaller kinds of credentials, and that's more what we're talking about in this space. So when we mean small, we mean smaller in comparison to what was your traditional or well-known offering. And then the last there is that it needs to be narrower in focus than a traditional credential. So we're talking about a very specific skill set or competency and not a complete body of knowledge. So that's the working definition that we'll have here today. To give you a little bit of context around this, we wanted to find some points of agreement, some understanding across the industry, and we found some consistency with national definitions abroad. But those definitions, when talking to partners, weren't necessarily end-all be-all solution to helping them make a good strategy around microcredentials. So that's where a lot of this research hopefully kind of fills in some of the gap. The definition isn't the most necessary thing. And again, we wanted to make sure it aligned with higher ed, and it has that specificity there. So when we're talking about alternative credentials, you may hear that a few times throughout the presentation. That's when we're pulling data from other sources. But we also want to note that alternative credentials mean lots of different things and are often, provided by alternative providers, like Google or IBM. So again, microcredential makes sense for this conversation because it's what higher ed does. We issue credentials. So let's talk a little bit about the learners. Who are we talking about in terms of who might engage with a microcredential and who we have in mind with today's conversation in particular? So what you see here on the screen is a number of different types of microcredential students and what they might hope to achieve by enrolling. So what you're seeing here is across the top is the audiences. So these are the different reasons adult learners might pursue additional education. You're also going to see their customer journey, a potential sample learner, and whether they'd be a good fit for a microcredential program. So let's start with the second one on there, second from the left, someone seeking promotion. So that's what they're trying to do. They need to learn a new skill to be eligible for that. They need a bite-sized offering that gets them quick mastery of that skill, and then the credential to demonstrate to their employer. employer. So then a microcredential is perfect for that type of person, right? That's what they need. They need some sort of certificate to demonstrate that they have the competency to get that type of promotion. In the third column, you have someone who's facing replacement, right? This is someone whose job is being eliminated by automation. They need something new. And the microcredential might help them get there, but they may need a full-term degree, depending on what they're trying to do and what kind of new job they want to get. And then the last there is the one on the right, which is the microcredential pursuing a passion concept. As I want to change careers, but I want to do something totally different. And this is probably not necessarily what a microcredential is for, or they might not be the best fit. Maybe that's the best way to put it, right? Is they may need to do a full-time degree program to get the skills they're excited about. They want to put in the time, the energy, and move into this new space. They might need a larger or more significant degree program. So we always want to be thinking about these different learners and how microcredentials may be fit for them. And we want to make sure we're aligning our programs with the potential learners that we have available. The students who are looking for this type of credential, how they might leverage it for their employment experience, and keep in mind what some of those challenges might be in the space. So let's talk next about some of the challenges our students are facing related to these microcredentials. And the first is a little bit of a lack of awareness. So as we noted a little bit before, you see there on the left, is students are optimistic. 75% of adults say that a digital credential could be a good way to supplement traditional education. So they're excited about it, they think it could be good. And 86% who've completed one said it helped them achieve their career goals. But at the same time, as you see at the bottom, 47% said they didn't know where to find these programs, and 40% didn't know where to start to even learn a new skill. So there's a little bit of confusion in the space. Students are uncertain how to get involved and uncertain about where to get the best learning experience. Is it through Google? Is it through IBM? Is it LinkedIn Learning? Is it through Rutgers University? Another gap to note there that you see on the right is that there's a little difference between what students expect to get from a microcredential and what they actually gain. And so what we found here is that there wasn't necessarily consensus on the desired outcomes, and only 27% anticipated learning anything new, but 94% reported that they took away new skills and they improved their job performance, which is great. However, their job application relevancy dropped off the list, which we'll talk about here on the next slide as we talk about how employers view microcredentials. So this is an issue with employer uptake. There's a significant variation between how folks are understanding and thinking about microcredentials in the field, and then how they're going to hire and promote employees who earn or possess them. And this is what we're seeing here is the big difference between executives and HR. So executives see traditional degrees a little more positively than HR staff and supervisors do, but overall, everyone's pretty well aligned. They have a strong understanding about a traditional credential and what it means. But when it comes to alternative credentials, executives feel positive about them. They're saying lots of things about it being a high value to an alternative credential. And you're even starting to hear about that, job applications aren't including, postings aren't including requirements for job degrees. However, when it comes to HR staff and supervisors, they view these alternative credentials, less positively, and they're not necessarily leveraged or influenced in how they're making hiring decisions. And so there's a little bit of a gap there between the headlines and the realities. And a big reason for that is that you see there on the right is our systems aren't necessarily set up to support microcredentials, to recognize them, to differentiate them on a resume, and then to give an employee extra consideration because they've earned those things. The technology isn't necessarily there, and it's not necessarily a significant space where institutions or companies are planning to invest in changing their technology. So at the moment, there's a little bit of a gap there in terms of how employers are actually looking at and valuing microcredentials. And then the last barrier, which is not uncommon, right, is that there are traditional barriers to new and innovative programs in higher education. So on the left there, you see some of the common roadblocks when we're thinking about changing policies and processes, connecting to new markets, being concerned about cannibalizing existing offerings or just faculty and staff time, and certainly those general concerns that we're experiencing about overwork or doing too much and things of that nature. But on the right, micro-credentials come with some of those unique barriers. One is, a new tech platform, which I know you all have a tech platform, so that's great. So that gives you a place to start, a leg up on some other institutions. But they're also, how do students pay for these things? They're often ineligible for financial aid. And then we also have to think about how we're competing in the space, right? It's not just about competing against other institutions. We're also competing against for-profit companies that are offering these things. And they can sometimes offer them at low or no cost. So a few challenges for certain as we're looking at the micro-credentials space. But what we want to think about as we're kind of moving into tactics for being successful in this space is thinking about the micro-credential ecosystem and how you all want to enter into the space. And right now, I know you have a lot of badges in terms of undergraduate, micro-credential offerings. And so that, that could be one of the you've already entered in, I guess, is what I want to say. But there's certainly other things you could consider, right? Maybe we get into employer partnerships more, or we launch other types of credit programs or non-credit micro-credential offerings for adult learners. So you can enter into the ecosystem in different ways. And what we recommend is entering with small-scale experimentation. Will be a higher risk portion of your portfolio no matter what. So those small-scale experiments help you navigate this uncertain landscape and make choices about whether you want to continue or discontinue a program. And those guardrails that you're going to want to set up around these things will help you make sure that these experiments are manageable. And then again, you can make those easy choices to off-ramp anything that might not be working as well as you had hoped. And what we also think is important, as you see there on the bottom right there, is that we do need to invest in some of the foundational practices that are going to make micro-credentials successful. And those are things like having a good financial analysis plan, so you know, again, whether it's going to make sense for your institution, adjusting policy from time to time to make sure that it makes sense and we can best support micro-credential learners, and it aligns with students who may want to continue their education at Rutgers, and having high quality service and support. So, great teaching and learning in the online space, effective pedagogy, and then of course, and learning and student support services available to students that are available to students no matter how they're engaging at Rutgers. And what we hope is if any investments are made in this space, we're thinking a little bit differently about how we deliver, we're providing better support, teaching better, all of those things are going to improve our entire portfolio, even if micro-credentials are a flash in the pan and go away and we never talk about them again. So that's how we kind of want to set the stage here in terms of thinking about this ecosystem and how we might want to engage with it. And we have a number of tactics that you see here. There's 10 official tactics here that we recommend in terms of achieving smart growth, focusing 1 on financial analysis, 2 stackability, and 3 aligning with student and employer expectations. And for the sake of time today, we're only going to touch on tactic 3, 5, 8, and 10. But if we have questions about the others, that's why we have this extra time here today. And I have some additional slides that I can pull up if we need them. So let's dig into this plan. So the first thing we want to talk about is thinking about financial analysis for these programs, because no matter what your goals are for micro-credentials, you want to make sure financial considerations underpin all planning and execution. So it doesn't have to be a revenue play, but we certainly want to make sure that if it is a mission effort, we always want to provide additional learning and opportunities for our students, that we're breaking even, and it's not a place where we're losing money. And then we have questions about that in the future. So what we recommend in this space is first having, really getting a good strategy around micro-credentials as an institution, which you all already have, and having a great proposal form. But the third thing is to think a lot about this financial viability. And so we recommend doing an independent assessment and using these 3 things to keep in mind and how you want to do that assessment. So the first is to think about market demand. And we want to make sure that anything that we're doing is aligned with what students and employers need. So we want to make sure that those skills are aligned so that the program is going to help students do that. And we want to guard against launching anything that's just exciting, because that happens a lot too. I think this would be cool. But if you put in the time and the energy to develop a really great program, but it doesn't have that market demand, so you're not getting students, you're either spending way too much money on marketing to try to get students to enroll, or you're wasting time and energy where you could have been spending it elsewhere. And so an example of what a partner does, as you see there at the bottom from the University of Adelaide, is through their proposal form, they ask faculty to rate the desirability, the feasibility, and the viability of a program, so that they have a strong sense of what this might be. and then they cross-reference that with market data so that they can feel really confident as they move forward with the program that it will meet market demand. And the faculty have been involved and participated in thinking about how that's going to align. The second thing you want to be thinking about here is competitor analysis. Is the market already saturated? Is there opportunity for us to innovate, to offer either a new type of microcredential or maybe one that meets a different type of learner need based on, I don't know, could be modality, could be length of time, could be specific focus or faculty opportunities. And you want to be looking at both, again, institutions that are higher education focused as well as for-profit competitors in this space. And I'm going to give the example that Western has on the next slide. And the last thing to think about here is cost and revenue. How much is it going to cost to get a program up and running? And will there be revenue to at least balance things out so that you have enough enrollments, you know that the upfront costs are managed, the marketing costs are expected. And the big thing that's often overlooked in this space is the cost of faculty and staff time. We put in a lot of time and effort into these things. We want to make sure that then there are benefits for the faculty and staff, for our institution, but also for our learners. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about all the various costs that might go into starting a program and making sure that there are revenue opportunities to, again, at least break even. So UTSA does this through a really detailed kind of document that explains how costs come in, where they're going to go, how they're going to share revenue, and we could look at that later. I could send that in follow-up if that's of interest. So to dig a little bit deeper on the competition space, we have a few key recommendations here on how to conduct a competitor analysis. And so the first is to search for competitive offerings in higher ed and assess their market share. So are they getting all of the students? Are there any more students left? And with microcredentials, you often have to dig a little bit deeper since they're not always captured in the same data sources that we might be looking at for traditional degrees. The second is you want to compare those offerings to what you propose. How novel is your idea? Will it be able to differentiate from other programs in the market? And then finally, you want to determine whether to compete or to pivot. Can we compete in this space, or do we need to do something different, deliver something different, or supplement other existing programs? And so the example there is from Western University. They did a competitor analysis program. And what they looked at was the duration, price, maturity, and reputation of the programs that they looked at, because they wanted to see what was going to influence a student's choice and why they might want to enroll at Western versus another program. And that also gave them a sense of how they could pivot if they chose to. So the next thing I want to note here, and this is a really useful thing to be thinking about, is are we trying to walk into a big space where there is a lot of opportunity that's also going to be more competitive, or are there opportunities to engage in a more niche market and find students or connect with students in ways that are different and more unique to Rutgers? So what you see there on the left is nearly 75% of alternative credentials of any kind are in business and technology fields. So that's certainly where most folks are putting their time and energy and interest. And you see some examples of where some other emerging or larger groups of microcredentials are being offered. But you might want to think about these niche programs here, and that might be easier said than done. And it doesn't guarantee that it's going to be, a moneymaker or revenue play. But there's a few examples that we came across here throughout our time looking at microcredentials that are unique to the institution and what they can offer, but also might serve a local or specific population. So it could be Canadian police who need to understand Indigenous policing, teachers in Maine who need to learn about a local Native American tribe, formerly incarcerated people in Ohio who are eligible for state grants, or highlighting a topic of special interest in the area. Alverno offers a microcredential taught by a local celebrity ecologist. So those are things that could draw people in, create some interest, and build upon that. And so one way we can help you with this is to help you look into market demand, leveraging our market insights. And so this is a tool that you can leverage. You can talk to Anthony. We can talk about how this could help you all do this to help you kind of figure out what are the high potential ideas where you might want to enter into the space. And we do this by not just necessarily looking at kind of like job listings, though. We look at job listings to get a sense of what kinds of market demands are out there. What kinds of skills are people looking for and have the greatest potential? And so we use these kind of verticals based on these labor market skill areas to give you a sense of what industries might be looking for. And we can look at things like business operations or social services and hospitality. And then we find out what skills are going to make the most sense there. And a couple of examples that we've shared, is, you could do a business intelligence platform micro-credential, project management micro-credential for computer or information sciences. And so these different analyses can give you some really great reports to help you kind of figure out what you want to do, where you want to go, and adapt your methodologies to align your programs with potential opportunity. So again, if there's questions about this, we're happy to kind of go into that a little bit deeper. Could be a great next step. So let's dig into stackability here. We talked a lot about, obviously, this financial analysis piece, but what we really want to talk about is this concept of stackability and how to make that more of a reality. So it's not a part of our definition, but it is often referenced in others. And what we find is stackability as a concept is often deferred, right? We'd want to get programs up and running. We can come back to stackability later. The barriers might be in the way to do this, and so often nothing kind of happens. There's missed opportunity there. Missing on lead generation, getting new students continuing to the larger pathways. And without those pathways, micro-credential students may just come and go, right? They complete this one thing and disappear, but we could potentially keep them further enrolled, get them enrolled in a longer-term program or a more traditional credential. And the stackability can also be helpful for employers to help them make more sense in terms of what we're trying to do, what a micro-credential is. It provides a little bit more understanding around what the type of learning is that's happening. So let's dig into what this might look like, what we mean by stackability. So often the term is used kind of loosely, right? It's like if you do this one thing, and then if there's another thing that you do, that's stacking. But that's not what we're talking about here. We have two really specific pathways to stacking. One is bundling, the other is pathways. So with bundling, students are going to complete micro-credentials that add up to a larger credential. So that's what you see in there on the left. They're taking a few credentials that they're going to add up. If they've completed them all, they're going to have a credential. And on the right is the pathway approach. And so this is where a student can take a micro-credential and have it count towards a larger degree. So the big difference here is that the degree is covered in the set of bundling micro-credentials, right? You're going to get them, you do all those things, you're going to complete the degree. In the pathway, there's going to be additional coursework to complete for the full degree beyond the micro-credential. And some folks are going to use these kinds of interchangeably, but we often find pathways to be the more common approach, and you can do both of these things, which we do have some examples for that we can share. At the bottom there, you just see some results that demonstrate the impact of stackability from some students in Ohio, 16% increase in earnings for students who earned a single credential, but a 37% increase in earnings on average for those who stacked multiple credentials. So some really neat impact data there to kind of see the impact and value. So let's look at some examples of what we're talking about. So the first is Carnegie Mellon here. And what they had was a Master's of Integrated Innovation for Products and Services, and it was a successful residential program. And to experiment with stackability, they took that content and unbundled it into 4 micro-credentials, each consisting of 2 graduate courses and offered online. Students could complete those micro-credentials in any order, and when they've completed all 4 of them, they're one capstone course from a full master's degree. So they didn't share actual tuition figures, but it works out to be roughly equivalent across either modality. And what's neat about this is it brought new students to Carnegie Mellon. Their enrollments exceeded expectations. They covered their startup costs in the first year, and they didn't cannibalize on their existing residential program. They actually increased applications in both programs. So what's neat here is that this is an interdisciplinary experience. And since the success of the program, they're embarking further on expanding these out in other ways to create more bundled opportunities for students to complete degrees. The second type of stacking here is pathways. So the micro-credentials fulfill a part of a larger degree, and the approach is typical, for schools that can build or want to build multiple stackable programs. So this is an MSU Denver example. You'll see the micro-credential itself is the pink box. It says non-credit, Introduction to Spaceflight Operations. And this is one of their career launchpad programs. So they have 12 of these. So these are different ways that students can enter through a micro-credential and potentially upskill to complete a full degree. This graphic here provides an estimated salary for each pathway, helps demonstrate the different trade-offs between the different pathways, and it signals the additional levels of coursework the student would need to complete for each pathway. So it gives students a sense of, they give them choice, options, and direction in terms of how they could get involved. This is probably one of the best examples we've seen. It clearly shows students how their initial non-credit course can be stacked into other offerings, and trade-offs they should consider before they move forward. So I know this is a very fast overview of all of this, but we can certainly answer questions in a bit. But I think what we just want to note here is that stackability is incredibly important, but also something that students don't understand. So the graphic like this can be particularly helpful to help students visualize what we mean by a bundled or pathway stackable credential, so that they have a good sense of how they could engage in these things, what the potential opportunities are, and what it could mean for them in their academic paths. So we're going to get into the last segment here, which is aligning these microcredentials offerings to student and employer expectations. And what that means here is trying to meet in the middle. We want to make sure we have positive margins for Rutgers University and your professional continuing online units. We want to make sure that you're at least breaking even. We want to make sure that students are finding these microcredentials to be appealing, so their interest, they want to enroll, but also valuable. They're seeing the outcomes of those things by being able to either maybe get a promotion at work or find a new job, upskill, pathway into a different degree, and then also useful for employers. So employers see them, they understand what they are, they know what it means, and they know that a microcredential from Rutgers University means something that they can then leverage to think in hiring or promotion decisions. So how do we do that? And the first thing is to recognize that microcredentials are different, and that there are a few missteps that sometimes come into play that undermine success in this space. So the first thing is that because microcredentials are smaller than traditional credentials, we think, oh, we can allot less time to develop these things. But building a good microcredential can take 6 to 18 months, and underinvesting in that time may impinge on creating a high-quality, market-aligned experience. The second misstep is assuming that students who are enrolling in a short program expect an accordingly less robust experience than they get in a traditional program. And that's not aligning with reality at this point. Students really want robust learning experiences no matter their credential type. And since the microcredential may be an on-ramp to a traditional program, if it's an engaging, supportive experience, that's going to really help build that pipeline for students to continue to stay engaged, take on new credentials, maybe continue at Rutgers in other ways. And the third misstep is assuming that because you're creating a microcredential aligned with market-informed skills, so you've done the market analysis right on the skills, that you're automatically going to have employer buy-in. But unfortunately, that doesn't always work out. Employers don't totally understand microcredentials, and even those that do need evidence of outcomes and alignment. So with these missteps, we have some tactics to address each one, and we're going to talk about 8 and 10 here today. So first is we want to hold our microcredentials to a high standard. We want to provide excellent experience for our students, really great pedagogy, really great online learning experience. And so we have some examples of how we want to do that. So the first quality check to think about is to ensure microcredential curriculum aligns with employer and industry needs. So an example there on the right, Simon Fraser University does this by working with major professional associations in their related industries. And 12 of their 23 non-credit credentials are endorsed by one of those associations. And that stamp of approval helps employers feel confident in the value behind the credentials, leading to better employment outcomes for the students completing them. The second is to create career-oriented learning opportunities. So Southern Alberta Institute of Technology concludes 4 of their microcredential programs with an industry-sourced capstone project. And this learning experience has been so useful that at least 3 startups have been launched by students as a result. The third is to deploy or even require rigorous assessment in your microcredentials. And Florida Gulf Coast University does this extra far. They collaborate with employers to develop an assessment criteria. And in some cases, the employers are even involved in the assessments, as with their partner Arthrex, which is a medical device company. The company reps attend the final oral presentations and help with the evaluation. And then students who successfully complete the assessment are guaranteed a job interview. And finally there, we want to optimize for delivery modality and format. So Carnegie Mellon converted a residential, which we already talked about, converted their master's program into this online certificates, but the key here is they contracted with an instructional design firm to ensure that there was high production value and quality instructional design for the online version of the content. And this, they also added some student support to this program and made sure that there was an orientation for their first cohort. So there's certainly a lot of work that can go behind the scenes to repackaging content and building out these programs to make sure that they're aligned with student and industry expectations. So the last thing we want to talk about here is thinking about how we can do business-to-business partnerships and how we can leverage these to really maximize the impact of some of your micro-credential programs. So B2B business-business partnerships, what we're doing is we're selling our micro-credential offering to an employer rather than just each seat to an individual student. So more than likely, you all are involved in some level of employer partnerships in some capacity, in some form. And this graphic captures the 3 typical levels of maturity that we see in these B2B partnerships. Most schools are at the bottom there. They're experimenting with one-off employer partnerships, or they have strong important partnerships, but not in a centralized way. And micro-credentials are getting them to think a little bit more about how we can continue to explore and expand. In the middle, you kind of see fewer schools managing multiple successful employer partnerships, and ones that are long-term and are guaranteeing a certain number of students and a level of revenue. And at the top is where a handful of institutions are so successful with their ongoing and large-scale employer partnerships that they become a regional partner of choice, so that employers are approaching them to request these kinds of partnerships. So we certainly think these are micro-credentials create a really great way to partner with employers and mature business-to-business offerings at the institution. So there's a lot of room to move in this space, and to help you kind of think about moving up the pyramid, and expanding on this strategy, we want to look at some examples of some pitfalls and potential challenges. So we want to avoid, anyone being disappointed by these kinds of partnerships. And so we have a couple examples here of how we can minimize risk. And the first is to minimize the amount of custom content that you're building for any of these partnerships. So this slide captures those range of options. So on the left, you've got less customization. You offer a menu of existing content, which employers can choose. They're creating their own custom class by a specific combination of content that they've selected, and you're not creating anything new. And Simon Fraser does this by targeting content to specific industries rather than optimizing for an individual employer. In the middle there, you've got a plug-and-play approach. This is a core set of content, but we're leaving space for an employer to build in employer-specific scenarios or projects or specific skills and details. And this came from you all. It's our content in their context. And then finally, schools are aiming for the most customization. They still landed the 80-20 breakdown. 80% of the content is standardized and 20% is custom for that employer. From Western Governors University, 20% is the special sauce, is how she described it. So what we recommend here is that there be 20% customization at most. If you build out fully customized program for each employer, you're going to struggle to maintain positive margin and certainly will put a lot of pressure on your institution. So this second risk mitigation strategy is to secure employer commitment up front. These kinds of agreements should be mutually beneficial, and we've sufficiently, and then you're sufficiently covering the risk, right? So employers are also taking a risk, and we're asking them to invest in a program before they know if there's value. So the University of Melbourne is finding ways to mitigate the risk here on both sides. They understood that employers are reluctant to invest a big sum up front for program development. So instead of asking them for that investment, they asked employers to guarantee a certain number of students who will enroll in the program over a designated time frame. Then they determine their full costs for developing the program, including the revenue they need to pay back to the university as part of their standard operations. They divide the costs across the number of enrollments the employer is committed to, and they've got a price per student that the employer will pay. This approach ensures that their program development costs are covered, gives employers a clear understanding of what they're paying for, and it even provides an incentive to commit to sending more students to achieve a lower per student price point. So hopefully, again, another great strategy to think through there in terms of reducing some of that risk with those business-to-business partnerships. All right, y'all, that is the end of this part of the run. I know that I went a little bit over my time here, but I'm excited now to dig into the questions that folks have. I am going to stop sharing for now, but been happy to pull up additional slides here as they are helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. That was really interesting, and I think we learned a lot. I thought the most interesting thing to me about this talk was there were a lot of really good examples that we were able to see about how others have done things, and also just it seemed to open up a lot of possibilities and a lot of ways to rethink what we are doing, and maybe better ways to accomplish what we want to with micro-credentials. So I'm here representing our steering committee for Microcredentials. We have 7 units that issue digital credentials, and each of these units have members on our steering committee. And so that's my perspective coming here. And so you've stopped sharing. That's great. If anyone has additional questions in the chat that you would like to put in, you're welcome to. I have the couple questions that we have here. And so we're going to go through a few questions for you. And my first question for you is really comes from, I think, my experience and the experience of many folks on our micro-credential steering committee, which is that you've talked about the biggest audience for micro-credentials as being not our current undergraduate students necessarily, but those folks who are in the workforce and who are outside doing things and might want to come back and get some more training or pick up additional skills. And I'm wondering about, most of our micro-credentials, I think, have been designed by folks who are in different units, and maybe we're experimenting by offering it to folks who are current students, other than a few of our units which do reach out to other continuing students as well. So do you see that the work that we've done reaching out to our current students, do you see examples of successful work on that way, or should we be focusing more on reaching out beyond our walls to the outside world right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if we necessarily have a best in class example of someone that's just absolutely, crushing this space, right? And a big reason for that is that institutions are approaching it differently, and they're figuring out what's working best for them and for their students, right? And so there is absolutely nothing wrong with focusing on the students that you already have. And a really interesting thing I've talked about with a couple of partners is thinking about how we can continue to support our current students after they've left us. So after they've graduated and completed their traditional credentials, so whatever level that is do they come back to Rutgers to get that continuing education opportunity? Is there a way to engage and to get now I need this extra skill? And the first thing they think of is you all, because you're their alma mater, they're where you want them to come back to you. So do they know that they have that as an opportunity? And that's, I think, one of the more intriguing examples I've heard from another partner is really focusing on keeping the pipeline of students that they already have and then continuing to serve them throughout their post-college experience and kind of keeping that pipeline alive. And then there's also a great opportunity there to think about how to engage students who have stopped out at a various phase, whether that be they've stopped out through the recruitment process, so they never enrolled, and that might be the best way to get them to get back to Rutgers by taking a micro-credential. And then if you have a pathway to a degree, there's a way to kind of keep that momentum going for a student who may have been reluctant or concerned or struggled. And that's true for a student who drops out at any point throughout the process, right? Is there a way for them to get back in to complete a little bit of something and get a taste of things, and then again maybe get back on a path? So those are two things I've heard that have been particularly interesting in terms of thinking about how you can really serve your current students and then kind of your current adjacent students at all stages of the life cycle. So there's definitely some really cool opportunity there. But I think the last kind of part, circling back to why there isn't necessarily a perfect example, is because it makes sense for the institution to decide. If Rutgers has decided this is the population we want to serve, and you want to go all in on that and kind of helping your current students, get additional skills, badge those skills, demonstrate that on a resume, I think that's a really unique differentiation proposition that you can keep moving forward with. I think the research that we did here was just focused on this kind of adult learner, returner, some college, no degree completer population. And that's where we're just seeing most of the investment, because one of the slides I took out, what is that for a lot of institutions, they saw microcredentials as a revenue opportunity. This would be a way to make more money. And the basic thesis of our research is that that's not guaranteed in almost any way. But there are some very niche opportunities that could be, otherwise it's going to be a mission driven event. And it sounds like Rutgers has some really strong foundation in your mission approach to microcredentials for your current students.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good way to think about bridging these two audiences, especially as, you know, our students won't be our current students forever, hopefully. So that's a great idea. Another big constituency we have in the room today are folks who are dealing with our online education. And so we've got folks who really work and focus on delivering education in the online modality. So what should we consider when we're making decisions about the modality of choice and really connecting these maybe to online instruction? Do you have any suggestions about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the vast majority of microcredentials that are out there are online. That's probably where the most growth is happening in this space in terms of meeting learners where they're at. So if we are talking about mostly adults, some college no completion, or adult learners who are upskilling or in place or upskilling to change careers, many of them are looking for those flexible, affordable options, and that can in many ways is going to be an online program and maybe even an asynchronous online program. And they're also looking at, if they're going online, like I need this thing, they're going to find LinkedIn or Google or IBM Skills Academy first, or Coursera or any of the big online giants. And so that's where you're really seeing the competition and why it's challenging to enter into the space, because there's so much more competition for this type of learner and in this modality. So I think we would still recommend the online opportunity. I think there's a lot of great opportunity in the online space. I was actually at a large public institution earlier this week talking to them about their online learning in general and supporting adult learners. But we did have a conversation about how they probably have too many online programs. They just went all in. They kind of did the opposite of what we recommended on that slide, which is we're going to turn everything into an online program, but they're not seeing the enrollments. They're not coming in the ways that they hoped. There's some quality concern issues. There isn't the market alignment. So now they're kind of trying to rein it back in, right? They're trying to say, okay, well, we want to focus on a few key things. We want to make sure we're aligning our market needs. We want to make sure we're not overwhelming faculty or putting programs online that don't make sense. Not everything is going to thrive in the online space. Not everything makes as much sense. There might not be, again, the market demand or the interest. So I would definitely recommend having some great conversations with your online team about their strategy and how they want to expand, and then how we could maybe leverage those microcredentials and also achieve other institutional goals. There's a lot of great opportunity for some synergy there to meet your mission expectations as well as enrollment and potentially revenue opportunities.
Okay, thank you. We do have some questions that have been coming in on the chat, so I wanted to kind of rewind a little bit and see if we can bring a couple of those in. So Jim, who's in our continuing education space, asked if you could provide some specific info about the potential data sources for non-credit credentials. He says that much of the contracted research hasn't been able to produce reliable numbers precisely because they're not included in IPED's data. So do you have any kind of technical response about where the data is?
The short answer is no. The short answer is no. That's the biggest problem with this particular element. And even why, if you noted in the micro, I don't think I expressed it very clearly, but in the market insights report, right, it's hard for us to even figure out exactly, what we're looking for here, because the data is so nebulous. There's so many providers that don't have to report to anyone ever. And then even if you do have to report, right, you have to report to IPEDS, you're not reporting this information. So you're unable to find this in a very consistent, accurate way. The for-profit companies certainly are not sharing their enrollment to revenue numbers in any way. And so it is pretty hard. It takes a little bit more of kind of the hunt and peck, looking around at various websites, getting a sense of data you have about where students are going if they're not enrolling in your programs, doing some survey research, I can go back to our research team and see if there's better recommendations than what I've provided right now. There might be a few other sources that I'm just not thinking of at the top of my head. But for the most part, yeah, it's a very challenging market to figure out. And that's partially why we recommend the business-to-business approach, because then you know that there's a guaranteed audience, right? You know that this company in your area is looking for people to upskill in this capacity, and they're not finding, really great opportunities, or not as trusted of opportunities. And that's where the Rutgers brand and in your own region are going to go a long way for you, because you will be a more trusted badger. Or I also went to Wisconsin, so that, I always love a good badger, but also a trusted provider of these kind of credentials, and folks will see those credentials and trust them. And if they know more about them, that's going to go a long way. So you also have that competitive edge, even if you aren't able to exactly identify where your competition is.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And I think that's a good segue into another question that we got, which comes from Jesse, who asked, how about embedding industry credentials into degree programs? There's good momentum for this within New Jersey Pathways, for example. Have you seen any of that, embedding these credentials into degree programs, and embedding some digital badges, micro-credentials that employers would want, but into those degrees themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to admit to not having a lot of depth in that particular area, but I do have a thought on this based kind of on our research and I guess our point of view on micro-credentials, right? Is most of your degree programs, or probably all of your degree programs, come with a lot of cachet. And that's what we see there on that one slide, looking at executives and supervisors, and then HR, right? Is everybody agrees, you got a degree from Rutgers. We trust it. We think you know what you need to know, right? We're good there. So you don't necessarily need the badge, right, to be able to demonstrate to an employer that this student knows what they need to know, because there is still a lot of trust in higher education, and particularly high quality institutions like Rutgers, that folks know that if you're, College of Engineering or your College of Business or whatever is issuing a degree, that those students have some baseline skills that they need, right? Now, where that does come in a little bit more handy might be helping students understand and articulate the skills that they've developed, so that the badge might mean something to them to be able to say, like, oh yeah, I should be able to talk about this in my cover letter, or put this on my resume, or put it on LinkedIn, that in addition to this bachelor's degree or master's degree, I also did develop these additional skills along the way. And those might be more beneficial for some students than, maybe a traditional certificate program, right? Is something that they can share around, they can talk about, gives them some language. So I think that's where I think we're seeing a little bit of differentiation in the undergrad space, right, from the adult learner space. This is more of a supplement to what they're already doing, the traditional degree path. So I'll look into that a little bit more too, because I do think that's a really interesting question. But I think that's how I'm kind of understanding it from, our point of view so far, and our understanding of the field.
Yeah, thanks. That seems like a good answer there. A couple more questions if we have time. So I'm just trying to get through last few minutes here. So we did have a question in from, I'm going to go to Karen's question and then to Christopher's question. So Karen says, are there examples of partnerships with experiential learning, externships, or cooperative preceptorship programs or departments? That is something, experiential learning is something that we are really trying to focus on and build as part of our master plan at Rutgers. So have you seen any of those examples in your research?
That are offering micro-credentials?
Yeah, so a micro-credential, I guess, maybe for going out into the community, doing an experiential learning thing, maybe as part of coursework or as a non-credit part of a program that someone is enrolled in.
Yeah, I don't have a good example of someone that's doing an excellent job of this, but I think it kind of goes back to the same, a little bit to my previous answer, is that we're seeing expanded badging in the undergraduate space for a variety of different things, to be able to say, like, you did this, kind of that gamification of learning that we talked about for a long time. Certainly people like to post things on LinkedIn about things that they learned. The big the big questions that kind of arise from that is, how much does it help, right? Who does it matter to, right? I go back to an example a colleague of mine shared. So she's on the research team. She completed her credential. She put it on her LinkedIn, and then her husband made fun of her for putting it on LinkedIn. Right? She's like, but I did it, and it was an actual credential in the sense of, she did a learning experience. There was an assessment that demonstrated capacity, and then she put has this credential to share, right? Whereas you can go on LinkedIn Learning and you can watch any video and you can get a little badge for it. And did you learn something? Hopefully, but it's nebulousness. It kind of starts to undermine its value, right? And so that's the challenge I think what we're facing with some of the badging is, what does it mean, and does it mean the same thing to everyone? And since there is so many different languages and terms and different institutional definitions around these things, that it might not matter as much outside of the doors of Rutgers as it does to maybe everybody inside, right? It might mean a lot to your students. It might mean a lot to your faculty. It might be really helpful to categorize student engagement. There's all sorts of really positive benefits. It's just a more of what's going to make the most sense for you all. And our research really focused on, how does this make sense for employers? And for the most part, that's where you're seeing that confusion, right? Is if a student applies, this is me just riffing on it a little bit, right? They apply, they've got the degree. That's all the employer cares about, right? Like, okay, that's cool. You did these other things, but I'm good. I don't need to know that, right? And that's not necessarily true. But if you're working with an employer, for example, in your area, and you all have worked together on a micro-credential, a very specific micro-credential, on a skill like AI, which is that's what people are looking for right now, right? Is, do you know how to leverage generative AI? Can you use it in the workspace? If they have a Rutgers approved credential that you all have developed in partnership with industry that has cachet, now we're talking, right? Like, that's something people are looking for. Like, oh, cool, you got that credential from Rutgers. Now I trust and value you a little bit more in addition to your degree path. So I think there's just a big gulf between some of the undergraduate badging and then some of the credentialing that we're trying to do for upskilling. Nothing's wrong with any of it, but that's just what's creating some of the confusion that you're going to kind of see in industry, and why I don't necessarily have an excellent answer for you on the undergraduate, I want to say experiential learning certification, if you will.
Well, thank you. So I see that we are just about, we're at the 1:30 time point. And so what we're going to do is we're going to switch to a more informal format now. So we're going to encourage folks who would like to ask questions to raise their hands, and we can continue to take some of those questions. Sorry, there was a lot of comments in the chat. We did not get to all of them so far. So if you'll stay on and ask your questions, we'd really appreciate that. If you do need to leave and need to run now because you have another meeting, feel free to at this point. It's totally fine. But we'd love to take your questions now by raising your hand from our audience.
I even appreciate the discussion in the chat about, there's common language that those kind of badges can create, but then also students aren't motivated by them necessarily, and they're not picking them up or using them. So anyway, again, it's just that's the problem, the nebulousness of it. Anyway, other questions or thoughts? Because also too, if folks want to share ideas with each other here, this is a great space to kind of talk about what you're thinking or working on.
Is Christopher Scherer still in the chat? You had a question earlier that I thought was interesting that you could ask if you're still here.
I was about to start my lunch, but I won't. And instead, I will ask my question. And it's not something that I know a lot about. I'm just aware that there is an initiative that has come forth from ETS and the Carnegie Foundation to investigate new kinds of credentials for education, right? And I know a lot of people are doing this kind of work, but given that it's Carnegie and that they've embedded the credit hour to begin with, I thought that was pretty intriguing, particularly where I come from. We're in the School of Arts and Sciences and we live and die by the credit hour. And I was just curious whether or not you had any awareness of this initiative and if you had any thoughts about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not super well versed on that particular initiative, but what I can say is that we have done a little bit of work thinking about micro-credentials and how to connect them really to traditional credentials. And that's what you're actually, a little bit of the stackability piece we didn't get into is what we recommend is aligning micro-credentials with traditional credentials in terms of your pathways or your bundling. Because let's say if you can say 3 micro-credentials equals 1 credit of Rutgers graduate credit, now an employer gets it. Like, oh, okay, cool, that makes sense. So it's language that makes sense, that you understand. Like, if these can land, build up to a credit or build up to a course or build up, to eventually to a degree. There's a little bit of it starts to bring things together and make things a little bit easier. So one of the examples that we have is, I think it was New Mexico State University. They have a micro-credential, and the micro-credential is worth 1 credit upon completion. And if you complete all 3 of these micro-credentials and take an assessment, you get credit for an entry-level engineering course. And then that engineering course could be applied towards a degree. So that's how they think of it, as a pathway, right, for students to get started, build some competency, and develop it. And if they never completed it, at least they could say, I completed a 1 credit micro-credential, which equates to a 1 credit course at X institution, and that means a little bit more. So it's basically tying these alternative credentials, micro-credentials together towards the more traditional credentials, so that there's a little bit more currency in the space. So I will be curious to see, though, if this continues to be more reined in, if you will, or that the Carnegie Foundation really does, commit to some more meaningful definitions.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy your lunch, Christopher.
Any other questions from our audience? Yeah, Jesse.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, I had the question. Thank you for that presentation. I had the question on embedding industry credentials, and let me preface that I thought your response was great. That the degree is king, and that holds the most cachet, and probably the best value is in how students will use the credential to articulate the skills that they gain. So just to put a bit more context on the question, we did at Rutgers North, last year, we did like a faculty learning community on this topic, and we looked at it in depth. And my biggest takeaway from that was, and this is generally not always, was that when we talk about the value of a degree, the value of the micro-credential, that the value, if we define value as relevance to the job market, that the most valuable micro-credentials are not ones that we create, again, generally, but ones that are created by employers that we then embed into industry, into our degree programs. So you see this a lot within, I think, New Jersey Career Pathways. If you're not unfamiliar, they have funding from Governor Murphy. It's at the community college level, between the community colleges and New Jersey Business Industry Association. And they're doing this in very thoughtful ways, meaning specifically concrete examples. Take your CompTIA certs, your Azure certs, your Google UX certs, whatever, and that you embed them into your degree programs. And there's a lot of precedent for this, right? Like American Council on Education has a rubric, right? Like this cert is worth 3 credits, for example. So my question was more for just internally among Rutgers, like, how are we thinking about that? How are we feeling about that direction in higher education? Because there's pros and cons, right? Like I could say a pro is that a liberal arts student would come out of this with their liberal arts degree plus some job ready skills. But a con is, do we really want to, are we potentially risking sacrificing critical thinking in our curriculum for like the skillification of our curriculum? So how we think among colleagues, how do we think about that question? And thank you.
That is a good
Rutgers
question.
want to weigh in on that?
No, this is Jim Morris. I've never understood that dichotomy, right? That either this or that. Chris Scheer and I have lots of conversations where, I'm a former journalism major, English major, history major. They can and should be people that are out thinking AI, right? So I don't care whether it's keyword research, marketing analytics, content creation, content development. Those are all skills. I mean, and a history major should be getting a Google Analytics certification, a pay-per-click certification, and you could have meaningful assignments, not just did you get that skill, but how are you using that information? I mean, we have to outcompete a computer. And we're the people to do it. I mean, so I just have never understood this idea that because you give somebody a skill that you can't make an assignment, an authentic assignment around that challenges their critical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, that is kind of a funny thing of kind of tying these things together. Is you could have a really great class that one of the assignments is to complete, basically a micro-credential. So again, this is kind of where it kind of builds towards the traditional degree still being foundational element of our educational experience. But one thing I'll just note is kind of going back to Jesse's comments is one of the elements we didn't get into today is credit for prior learning, and how do you provide credit to students who've done learning in other ways, prior to entering into an institution. And that's particularly helpful for those folks who are, some college, no degree, or other adult learners that are returning to the spaces. Can you provide them some credit for either completing some credentials or, some life experience like work or being in the military or something like that, which is just an opportunity to come together. But yeah, certainly I don't think we're talking about an either or. I think we're really talking about a path. The best thing is that help people develop either the additional skill they need to upskill to move into a new industry, or to kind of get started into maybe a more traditional degree path. Because again, that's where we know that more comprehensive learning will come in and really help shape great thinkers for the years ahead. Jim.
Yeah, so if I asked a hard question before about enrollment counts, I'm asking an even harder one, and that's about pricing. Because you mentioned, I really wish that the free and low cost competition were bad, but it's not. I mean, there's a lot of good. When I hire people for my marketing, I send them all through the HubSpot certifications, free, targeted. I mean, there's just a lot of good industry a lot. I mean, not a little, a lot of good industry certification out there. And I have trouble competing with them. So my question is about price. How do you, if somebody comes to you with a pricing, like when they're coming out with a new program, how do you advise them to think about pricing?
Yeah, and basically we don't touch it with the 10-foot pole. That's really the EAP stats. We won't give you advice on pricing because we don't want to be held responsible for it. But no, but it is because it's really hard, and I think that's where we come back to this. Even the title of this presentation is Achieving Smart Growth, because you can go into the industry if you go into this right trying to make money and you can't, right, or you find too much competition. Or there's low cost, no cost options that are way better and more accessible, right? So it's about finding what makes the most sense for Rutgers. And if, for example, right now, if it's staying with badging your current students and maybe expanding a little bit into creating opportunities for like stop outs and alumni, that might be the place that makes the most sense. And you all want to continue to just invest your resources in online degree programs or your existing program. So we're also kind of not saying like microcredentials are the way to go. The other thing would be is if you do enter in, you've done the market analysis, you've done the competitive analysis, you've done a cost revenue analysis, you've got all this information to know, okay, we can enter into this space. I would then turn it to your budgeting team to decide how do we enter in the space? At what price point can we make the money we need to make, but also, still recruit students? And there might only be 4 or 5 programs that the entire Rutgers University offers, because that's the only way you can make money. And this is some examples we saw some other institutions, like they have 1 or 2 huge online programs, and like that's it, right? And these are full degree programs that I'm talking about in this example, but whether that be an IT program, a nursing program, an AI credential, right? If you can offer the best thing, that's where you can then kind of set the price on that. But it might not make sense for it's not a thing you want to necessarily have a huge portfolio around, because you already have a huge portfolio that needs to be tended to and supported. And so again, that's kind of where we recommend in terms of this space, is just being really cautious, so that you aren't losing money and wasting time, and you're getting the best bang for the buck, and you're finding the right students. So unfortunately, I can't answer your question with good authority on pricing, but it's going to be what's going to make the most sense for Rutgers.
Well, I will say we've got some people on the call. I see Sharon Storger and Mary Jane and Karen Harris. These are people that are helping, instructors make, authentic assignments, like, real live assignments that, if you can do it and they are industry focused, outcome focused, then, you can have those assignments where they get involved. Julie Johnson just popped in. I mean, her digital asset management stuff is built with the best people in the industry, and that the outcomes are that good because of the people and the way that they're doing the assignments. And that's where the pricing power comes from. That the differentiation is on the quality of the assessment and the feedback that comes with that assessment.
Yeah, and it might be an example of a niche thing that Rutgers does so well that you could sell that to an employer, and say, hey, we're going to do this micro-credential. It's X amount of weeks. It's online. We want your employees to take it. We've already got all these amazing demonstrated results from our students. And I'm not going to put a number to it, but you might be able to put a bigger number to it if you're selling it to X company, versus, again, you're trying to recruit individual students to take that. But if it's niche enough, or it's strong enough, right? It's like, this is so amazing. The results are amazing. People want that experience, but they don't want a full degree program. Maybe that's, again, a micro-credential that you could put out into the space, and again, still, if not break even, make money, but also maybe really interest new learners in different ways. So I think you've already hit on something too right there. That's like, what's the thing that we could do, not necessarily easily, but is something we could pull out of our existing curriculum to maybe meet a new learner need.
What other questions do we have this afternoon? Well, I have one question for you, which was near the end of your presentation, Kevin, you said that EAB can do some market insights and can analyze skills requested in job posts over time. Can you tell us more about this service and what type of findings you do in this service?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share that screen again. And is Anthony, are you still on here?
Yep, I am definitely here.
Do you want to talk about the market insights element?
Happy to. Do you have that slide?
Yeah, you see it? Anthony would be your guy. You'd want to go to for this. He's not going to do it. He's going to tell other people to do it. But he's got the weight.
Thank you for that clarification, Kevin. Now, one of the services that we offer as part of your partnership with EAB, we do call it a market insights service. And follow up, in addition to the slides, I'll share a link to that service. And essentially, we look at the entire program lifecycle. All right. So whether you're looking at starting a new program, whether you're looking at assessing a current program that is underperforming in any way, whether you want to look at an entire portfolio of anywhere from 12 to 30 programs, or if you want to consider, okay, what's possibly missing from our current portfolio as we think about future opportunities, We do analysis in those 4 areas, looking at national and regional conferrals and job postings, to kind of come up with our own score. We call them a best bet score. And we do that analysis for each of our partners.
Thank you so much. I mean, that sounds like it might be valuable for someone on the call. So we really appreciate that.
Absolutely. We're here to help. Yeah. And certainly Market Insights is a great resource for you all. And then we have other information too on Microcredentials if we need to go deeper at any point with, individual units or have continued conversations. Happy to support from these various angles.
One thing I'll add as we talk about micro-credentials is our market opportunity scan, which does focus again on those other opportunities that you may want to consider to add to your portfolio. We can do a report specifically for alternative credentials around the market opportunity scan.
Perfect. All right. Just unpin you here. Perfect. Any other questions from our audience today? It is a beautiful Friday afternoon. I think I haven't looked out the window in a few hours. I think it's a beautiful day. So if there are no other questions, we're going to conclude the meeting now. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much, Kevin and Anthony, for your time here. We really do appreciate it. Kathy and I, we will follow up with some resources for the people who are registered. We really enjoyed the conversation today, and I think we learned a lot. I certainly learned a fair amount about things I didn't know about, programs I didn't know about, and new approaches to this. So thank you, everyone.